Hi folks, Justin here. In the last video, we looked at how to use DevOps pipelines to take a solution from a source Dynamics 365 or Power Platform environment and move it to our target. In this video, we're going to look at how to take our source solution and put it under version control so that we can see over time what's changed and, if necessary, roll back to a particular point in time or version. Now, before we jump into it, let's take a quick moment to talk about what a repo is, because we need them. So a repo is just simply a storage area for files that DevOps is going to use to control our versions or monitor our versions of files. So the first thing we need to do quickly is to click on Files under Repos. We need to initialize the repository. Now, we don't have any particular source code to load at the moment, so we're just going to use the last option here to initialize it. And that's just going to create a blank README file, well, not a blank README file, but a README file, and put it into our repository. Now, what I'm going to do then is create a folder called D365 Solutions, which has to have something in it. So again, we'll just create a README file. And it creates a folder and a file, but it hasn't actually put the file in yet until we click commit. We could add a comment if we like, and then commit again. Now it's actually stored away in the repository. So, having initialized the repository the way we want it, let's go and build a build pipeline. So, if you haven't seen the first video, I'd suggest you go and have a look, because that gives you the basics of how to set up a pipeline and add tasks or actions to it. And this is going to build upon that knowledge. So in this case, we're going to create a new pipeline. We're going to use the classic editor, accept all the default options there, and then go to empty job. So that's going to give us our pipeline that we want to go with. The best thing to do is, in this case, is to name our pipeline. So we're going to call this export solution and commit to source control. Obviously, you can choose a shorter name if you want to, but that'll do for now. Next thing we need to do is click on the agent job, scroll down on the right-hand side, and tick the allow scripts to access the OAuth token. So that's going to use the same credentials that we used in the last video. So that needs to be set. Next, we need to, or we're going to set up a couple of variables to use, much the same as in the first one. So we're going to have solution name. Oops. That's our solution name, and we're going to leave that settable at queue time. And we're also going to create one for the current date. And we're not going to have that settable at queue time because we're going to set that automatically in the tasks. All right, so our variables are done. Let's go over to our tasks. So now we can actually start adding some things. So the very first thing that I'm going to add is a PowerShell task. Again, we'll get to see what that's for. The next thing we're going to do is add our Power App. So as we saw last time, we're going to add the tool installer to initialize things for us. We're going to export the solution from the source, so we need that one. And we're also going to use the unpack solution. And we'll talk about a little bit more about that when we get up to it. And finally, we're going to use a command line. All right, so let's set up the tasks that we need. So as we saw last time, we've got some red things, so we need to go through and action those. So what we're going to do in the PowerShell is simply get the current date. Right? So we're going to make it an inline, and I'm just going to copy a couple of lines rather than you watch me type them. So I'll make these available in the link down below. So here we're just getting using the get date function in PowerShell, and formatting it a particular way. And then we're setting it in the host variable called current date. So this is just the format that we need to use to do that. And then down the bottom, I'm just echoing that out so that we can see that it was set. Power Apps Tool Installer, we don't need to do anything for that one. The export solution, much the same as last time. We need to, let's just refresh. Oh, hasn't picked that up. So I'll go through and create the credentials as last time. I'll skip over it because you've seen how to do that. Okay, so I've created my service connections for my source and target as we did in the first video. So we'll go back to our pipeline over in our first video. We'll refresh that and we've got those two. So I'm coming from the development environment. The solution name, remember, we've got a variable for that, so we can use that. Now the output file is, just going to copy this into there. So what this is going to do is use a predefined variable for agent.build directory. So that's a specific spot on the virtual machine that's doing the build. And then we're going to use our solution name.zip. So that's just where to put the solution. Now, we'll copy that because the next thing we need to do is set up the unpack. So the unpack is going to take that zip file that was exported and extract everything out of that, ready to put it under source control. So the input file that we're going to use is exactly the same thing that we exported to. So we copy that, and the target folder is going to be the build.sources directory. So that's a specific spot on the virtual machine for the agent where source files are stored. We're going to store it under D365_solutions, which happens to be exactly the same as our repository folder that we created. And then we're going to create a folder under that, which is matching the solution name. And we'll leave it as unmanaged when we unpack it. The last thing we need to do before we actually execute this, because there's not too much to this, again, I'm just going to copy a little bit across. And the easiest thing for you to do is, again, I'll make this available, is to just copy and paste. So what this is essentially doing, without going line by line, is it's setting up who is doing the committing of the files into the repository. So in this case, it's going to be, the name is automatic build. We're checking out and adding all of the files that we've stored in the folder, which is where we did the unpacking. And then we're doing a commit. So effectively what we're doing is saying, grab all the files that we unpacked and put them into the repository. That's pretty much all it's doing. The last piece after we've done the commit is we have to do a push, which pushes things into the repository. And that's what this last line is doing. So again, all you need to do is just copy and paste this. Obviously you can set up bits and pieces. Now, when we use the PowerShell script to set the current or get the current date, this is where I'm using it. It's going to go into the comment for the actual commit. And I'll show you an example of where that shows up. All right, so we've set everything up. It was pretty quick, as you saw. Get the date, set up the tools, export, unpack, and put it into the repository. So all we need to do now is to run that. So we saw last time how to run it. So we can save and queue. And so I'm going to save that and set it to run. So that's now queued up. It's going to go through and run pretty much as we saw last time. So I'll come back in a moment once this is run, and let's have a look at the results of it. The first time you run this, you'll get an error on the command line script, as we can see here. And right down the bottom here, it's giving you the information you need, and it says you need the Git generic contribute permission to perform this action. So basically what it's saying is that it doesn't have permissions to commit to the repository. So what we need to do is go to project settings, and to repositories. And right at the very bottom of the permissions, you'll see that it's created a user. Now we can't do this before we run it the first time because this user gets created the very first time you run it. So we need to go down, select that user, and we need to give it contribute rights. While we're here, not that we need it for this example, but we can use the create branch, make sure create tag is there, and make sure read is set to allow. Right, so we need to set those permissions. Then now that we've done that, because the user's been created, now we can go back and run it again. And this time it should run through successfully. So I'll come back after that as well. Okay, so that's finished running. You can see it was successful the second time it ran. The command line completed, and it ran through, in this case, in about just over a minute. So if we have a look at our repository files, if we now expand the D365 solutions, you'll see that there's now a folder that matches the solution name. And if I expand it, here is all the components that come out of your Dynamics 365 or Power Platform solution. And in this case, we had a Canvas app in there, so we can actually see we'll just move this over a bit. We can see the components of the Canvas app. We can see the entity, in this case, the application entity, and the contents of that. So what I'll do now, just so you can see the advantages of this, is I'm going to modify the source by adding a field into the application entity. And then I'm going to run that pipeline again, and I'll show you what you can do within this to see the change. I'll be right back. Okay, so I've made a change. I've added a couple of fields to the source solution and run that process again. So by coming back into the repo area, I've come down to the entity.xml file, which contains the definition of my entity. And if I have a look at history, it shows me that there's been 2 commits for this file, and I can go back and compare. And so what it's showing me is the previous version, and the head is the current version. So on the left is what was there before, on the right is what has changed, and it's showing we've got 80 new lines in here, and in the scroll bar here, we can see that the green section is what's been added. And this, we can see here is the date process field I added, and also the date submitted field. So that shows you the power of this by looking over time at what's changed in your solution. So there you go. That's how to get your solution under version control. In the next video, we're going to look at how to take it out of version control and release it into the target environment, allowing us to select any version that's been committed. So I hope that's been useful. I'd really appreciate your subscribe and like to the video, and I'll catch you next time. Thanks. Bye.